Hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Mays-Childers, Senior Product Marketing Manager here on the Azure Synapse marketing team, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to our fifth Ask the Expert session for Azure Synapse influencers. I'm joined today by Jovan, Philip, Strahinja, and Stefan from the Serverless SQL team. You might recognize Jovan and Philip from our popular Synapse Espresso series on our YouTube channel. And they're going to be here to answer all your questions on Serverless SQL pools in Synapse. These Ask the Expert sessions are intended for active Synapse influencers, so if you haven't signed up to join the program, you can still do so really quickly at aka.ms/Synapse influencers. It's free to join, share with your friends and colleagues. Just some quick housekeeping before we start. First, ask your questions using the Q&A function in Teams. If you submitted a question during registration, we'll also do our best to answer it in the hour we have today. Some questions we'll put out to answer live, and other questions we'll answer in the chat. Do try to stay on topic. If you ask questions that are not about today's Serverless SQL topic, we'll likely save them for a future Ask the Expert session. Your team's name is shown when you when we answer your questions in chat, and we'll try to give you a shout out if we answer your question live, or you can ask questions anonymously if you'd like. We are recording the session, just FYI. We've started sharing sessions a couple weeks after they launch, so that folks who miss it might be able to still catch it. Last but certainly not least, if you'd like to be sent some of our new branded swag, which is very popular, ask a question in the Q&A window and share your social details in the chat, and we'll send you a DM with a code to redeem your swag. You can also email us afterwards at synapseinfluencers@microsoft.com to claim your code. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our subject matter experts. As I said, Jovan, Philip, Strahinja, and Stefan are here. We also have a couple chat moderators helping us out, all members of our Synapse community team here at Microsoft. So we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. Without further ado, I'm going to switch and ask a very basic question to get us started. What exactly are serverless SQL pools, and why should our audience care about them? I'm going to hand it over to Jovan to answer that question.
Thank you. So why do you need serverless pool? Imagine that you need to have reporting and analytics on data lake or on Cosmos DB or any big data analytics that contains much more data than classic warehouse, classic database, like multi-terabyte data sets. And you need to have something that is cost effective and can handle large data sets. Serverless is built for this. Serverless gives you ability to open your Management Studio, your Power BI, your analysis service, any tool that you're using to connect to SQL Server, Azure SQL, or any flavor of SQL Server, and just connect to this, access directly your Azure Data Lake or Cosmos DB, and just run T-SQL query on top of this. The main scenario is reporting and analytics. With Serverless SQL Pool, you can easily connect your Power BI to any Azure Data Lake or Cosmos DB that has analytics storage. And you can easily run some analytics with very good price, like $5 per terabyte scan. So serverless is a bridge between your reporting tools and analytic tools and your big data stored in Azure Data Lake or Cosmos DB.
Awesome. We have a question that came in from, looks like TeamCube DE. Sasha says, I have views and stored procedures in a Synapse serverless database. How do I add this to a source control? I could not read the schema with SSDT or Visual Studio as I can do with SQL databases. What's the best practice for backup, restore, and deployment with Synapse serverless? And maybe those are multiple questions. So,
yeah.
Stefan?
Yeah. So current recommendation is to use PowerShell DBA tools to generate, create, and drop scripts for external tables and views and all other database objects. And with that, we can then import and create these objects. there is a blog that we can share in the chat and comments, which is explaining how we can achieve that. And regarding the SSDT and DACFX support, the team is actively working on that for Serverless SQL Pools, and that should be available by the end of this year.
Cool. Any additional notes on the best practices for backup and restore?
No.
Okay, just checking that. And this question's for Philip from Neeraj. What's the best approach for migrating stored proc from SQL Mi to serverless?
Well, it's quite a wide question, I would say.
Oh, Philip, hang on a second. You're just still muted.
Sorry, my bad. So SQL Mi and Serverless SQL Pool have completely different use cases, and there are actually many differences. So without knowing the more specific around this question, I would say that primary difference between SQL Mi and Serverless SQL Pool is that Mi is used to can write the data as a managed data in within the tables within Mi, and then you can do a lot of things there. While Serverless SQL Pool is used to query data files in your data lake. So the primary scenario is that with the Mi you have managed data. With the Serverless SQL Pool you are interacting with external data. Of course, with the Serverless SQL Pool you can also do data transformation, but basically there are crucial functional differences between the two. And I will share in a chat that I would like to ask you to check. That link is from a Serverless SQL Pool documentation, which outlines surface SQL surface area that is supported in a Serverless SQL Pool, and that will probably be the easiest way to see how and whether you can move forward, right? Because you probably know, you for sure know how your MI solution looks like, and then you can see what's supported in a Serverless SQL Pool and what's not supported. But please make sure before you try that, before you go that route, please make sure that the scenario that you have in MI is actually applicable to Serverless SQL Pool.
Yep. Neeraj, if you happen to be on the call and you want to clarify your question a little bit more, feel free to write in and we can address it further. We have a live question from Tim. Will there be DACPAC support in Visual Studio for Serverless Pool? And Jovan, you want to take that?
Yes, so unfortunately currently DACPAC is not working, but our goal is to fully align all the tools in the SQL Server ecosystem with serverless. So we cannot talk about some estimates when we expect this, but enabling DACPAC as any other tool is definitely in our roadmap.
Cool. Matthias is asking live, so is there support for Delta tables with the time travel feature?
That's a good question. Delta time travel is one of the main asks for Delta. Currently, we are working on different things. We are improving performance of Delta, and we believe that in next couple of months you will see much better performance for Delta, and you can compare it with other services that are querying Delta. So our focus in next couple of months will be performance improvements. But definitely after that, time travel is one of the main customer asks, and we will definitely consider adding this in future.
Wonderful. We have a question from VJ for around CI/CD for serverless SQL pools. I think this question's for Stefan. He's having trouble using Azure DevOps for serverless SQL code deployment. Do you have any tips for him?
So for some reason, Stefan.
Okay. Yeah. StreamYard was not working for me. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. So VJ has a question about CI/CD for serverless SQL pools. He's having trouble using Azure DevOps for serverless SQL code deployment. Do you have any tips for him?
Yeah, so we have a couple of plugins which could be used. So plugins are called Azure SQL Database Deployment or Azure SQL Data Warehouse Deployment. So we can create there the connection string for the serverless SQL pools, and then we can schedule an execution of a SQL script, which can be either inline or from a Git source control. So that's working.
Cool. Do we have some links we can share maybe for those?
I can share a screenshot of how the plugin looks like, or maybe on a marketplace on Azure DevOps.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can also search for that and share.
Thank you. All right, we have a question from Runholtz. Is it possible to create views without having to create a lake database, for example, using the master DB? I think this question is for Jovan.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is not possible. You need to create at least one lake database, and there you can create procedures and views. The idea is that master contains only some server level information like logins, that kind of things, and it is not designed for adding customer metadata or that kind of things. So even please try to avoid master and just try to create classic lake database. We believe that in most of the scenarios, it's better to use lake database because you can share them with Spark. You can have this classic data engineering where you are updating data using Spark notebooks, you're reading data using serverless. So we have this good collaboration between Spark pools and serverless pools. And using master do not have some, I don't know, do not have some advantage. We are not charging you per database, so you can create any number of lake database that you want. So adding additional database will not impact your cost and will not impact your performance. So our recommendation is always use user database for this.
Cool. We have lots of questions coming in the live chat, so let's get to the next one. We have an anonymous question. As Serverless SQL now supports reading the Delta Lake, can we expect full CRUD compatibility in the future, as in updating and deleting data in the Delta table? Jovan, you want to take that?
Updating data in Delta table is not the main scenario for serverless. Our goal is to improve this scenario where you are doing reporting and analytics on lake data. And in theory, we could do updates, but it will not be done in near future because this is not the scenario that we are trying to improve. Our main scenario is trying to improve performance and easy to use analytics and reporting on top of data lake. So I don't believe that updating data lake using T-SQL will be in some near roadmap in the future. I believe that you will still need to use Spark notebooks and say that Spark data engineers are updating data and SQL data analysts or BI engineers are analyzing or creating reports on this data.
Cool. We have a question for Strahinja here. Just how can you give us kind of an overview of how pricing or how to calculate the cost works for Serverless SQL, please?
Yeah. So generally, Serverless SQL Pool has the true pay-per-use model. So you will only get charged for the amount of data that is processed, and it is around $5 per terabyte of data processed. So it depends on the region. There is some information that you can find in our Azure Synapse pricing page, and also on the page regarding cost management for Serverless SQL Pool to understand more. And right now we have a offering of first 1 terabyte of data processed is being free every month. 1 terabyte you receive for free until the end of the year 2022. So, and when it comes to part of the data process and what that exactly means, so data process is the amount of data that the system temporarily stores while the query is being run. And the data process consists of the amount of data read from the storage, amount of data that is stored in intermediate results, and data written in the storage if you're using CIFS.
Cool. Thank you. I have a question from Jean Laurent. What are tables in a serverless database as everything is backed by files? Is there a difference between tables and views? Philippe, you want to take that?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. John Laurent asks, what are tables in a serverless database as everything is backed by files? Is there a difference between tables and views?
Well, yeah, I'll just make a small clarification. There are views and external tables in Serverless SQL Pool. Because when we say tables in a SQL, we usually think of those managed tables like in other SQLs. Yes, there is difference between a view and external table. Basically, there are two keywords that you can use to query data in the lake, which are open row set, which is a function, and then to use an external table. Open row set is a function where you specify the path, format, and a few things more maybe, and then you read the files, the folder actually. For external tables are just the metadata pointer to a path in your storage, and there is some additional metadata like file format or maybe delimiters in case of CSV and things like that. So basically, data is in the lake in the storage. You're just using Serverless SQL Pool to access the files in a storage. So open row set and external tables can be used to access those files, and there are differences. Actually, ideally we want to make them equal, both open row set and external tables, so you should not care which one to use, but today there are some differences. So suggestion is to use open row set when you need to quickly inspect the data, you don't know nothing about the data, you don't know the schema up front, maybe you want to do some count stars, maybe simple queries and so on. But once you craft your query and want to move to production, we suggest you to use the external tables. And there are a few reasons. One of them is that client tools, any client tool like a Power BI or any other tool that you use is capable to work with external tables, but not with open row set function. So you can use external tables, or you can use open row set and wrap them in a view in order to surface them to your client tools. But then still there are some differences. Particularly with external tables, you would have a better security experience than with open row set and views. And I would say that would be a primary difference that there is today. And as I said, as we move forward, we are continuously aligning open row set and external tables as much as we can. So yeah, as I said, primary driver for you would be use open row set to inspect the data and use external tables when you are comfortable with your data, you have your workload and you want to move to production.
Cool. This might be related. Matthias asks, will you support iceberg tables in the future?
No current plans on that.
Okay. We have a question from an anonymous attendee. Any plans to allow insert, update, delete operations on Delta using serverless SQL pools?
No plans.
We have a lot of people curious about the future here.
Yeah. So currently there are no plans for inserts and updates. So we are planning to optimize read scenarios, optimize analytics and reporting on Delta. But you can add this feature in our feedback site, vote for this, and we will definitely consider this. Unfortunately, it is currently not our primary scenario because we really want to optimize performance on analytics scenarios, and that's our primary goal. But when we finish with this, when we are happy with our performance and analytics and stability of query performance, we will create plans for the future, and any feedback or ideas are definitely something that we can use in our future plans.
Sweet, and we'll put that link in the Q&A so you can go suggest those updates. I have a question, another anonymous question. Is there a reason you need to specify a UTF-8 collation when querying a Parquet file? Can the default behavior be UTF-8? Philip?
So there is a reason why it should be UTF-8. There are actually two reasons. One is potentially wrong results. The other one is performance. So Parquet uses UTF-8 encoding, and basically the only way to be able to properly read character columns out of Parquet is using a UTF-8. Or to be more specific, if you don't use a common Latin characters, so maybe you use German umlaut, or maybe you use Cyrillic characters or Japanese, then if you do not specify UTF-8, you will have a wrong results. So for example, we have this Düsseldorf city in Germany, then you will see the garbage characters for this umlaut if you do not use UTF-8. So that's for having the correct results. And in order to have a better performance, you have to use the specific UTF-8 collation. And I will share a link to best practices, a Serverless SQL Pool article, where you can see what particular UTF-8 collation you should use in order to get the best performance. So let me provide some details there. So Parquet files are consisted of row groups. Each row group has multiple rows, and each file usually have multiple or many row groups. At the row group level, there is some metadata which says what are the minimum and maximum values of a specific each column within the row group. And basically, Serverless SQL Pool can leverage this metadata in order to skip reading row groups that you are not interested in based on your where clause, let's say. And for character columns, for this to work properly, you need to use UTF-8, particular UTF-8 collation, because that's the only collation that we can be sure that Serverless SQL Pool can be sure that row group elimination will be done properly.
Thank you. We have a question from Matthias. Drop external tables should also delete the data from the storage account when using CETAS previously. Any comments on this?
Well, yeah, we had a lot of debate on that one, and it's a challenging, it's kind of tricky to answer. Well, if you're looking to external tables through a lenses of managed tables, then yes, if you drop the external table, you should drop the data as well. But the thing is that those two, if we do that, that would probably confuse customers as well, because there are two different services that we have there, right? There is a Serverless SQL Pool, and then there is a storage. And by making drop external table plus remove content on a storage, that would mean that we need to guarantee the transactional consistency and everything that SQL users would actually expect to be the case, right? And there are many things that can go wrong. So we decided not to drop the content of the storage. Instead, there is a workaround. You're probably aware of it. Like you can use, let's say, ADF or any other tool to basically execute the drop external table statement and remove the content from the storage.
Cool. We have a question here from Nico. Srihinja, if you want to take this one. It's super basic, so we could also go around if other folks have suggestions. Just a question about where to start with Synapse.
Yeah, thanks. So if we talk about Azure Synapse in general, I definitely suggest visiting what is Azure Analytics doc. We have official one, and to get yourself familiar with what Azure Synapse is and to learn which services you can utilize for your business needs. And then after you learn these, let's say, basic things, you can then dig deeper in some of our getting started docs. I can paste both of those later in the chat. And basically, you can dig through those that are specific to some, that are related to some specific service. So if you want to need to know how the Azure Data Explorer works or Spark, you can check all of those. And if you're talking about general data warehouses and how to build and create data warehouses, then you should definitely start with serverless, right? When you're starting with Synapse, and this will help you explore Synapse Studio, get yourself familiar with Azure Synapse and T-SQL if you're new to the technology. And this will enable you explore data sets you plan to analyze later, and you can then take it from there, depending if you want with serverless or dedicated, etc.
Awesome, thank you. We have a question from Matthias. Can you share multiple serverless databases in the same workspace performance in total, or is it really independent?
Yeah, so maybe I can take this one. So basically, Serverless SQL Pool is one big service, right? And every database you have created in the Serverless SQL Pool, these databases are just the logical part of the distribution, right? So that's when we say you can build a data warehouse by serverless, you can build actually a logical data warehouse, because you can distinguish your data based on your storage or however you prefer into different databases, different schemas or whatever, and you can combine those through the views and external tables. So to answer the question, yeah, these databases, they're not actually storing the data, right? They're just a metadata layer, and the data is actually stored in the storage. So these databases are actually sharing the same serverless SQL pool.
Cool. We have a question, maybe Jovan, you wanted this. Are there plans to add partition pruning to non-Delta external tables?
So
oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, so partition elimination is already available both on Delta and Parquet tables if you are creating these partition tables in Spark and synchronizing them in SQL. So it is already enabled. The thing that it is currently not enabled, not available, is that you create partitioned external tables directly in SQL databases. If you need the partition SQL tables in SQL database, you need to create a view over partitioned open row set command. But we have plans in the future to align this behavior and enable you to create directly partition external tables in SQL databases using Serverless Pool, both for Delta and Parquet.
Wonderful. We are almost halfway through today. I just wanted to put a reminder out there. If you haven't yet raised your hand for some of our new swag, send us a note in the Q&A with your social handle, and we will hook you up. Cool. We have a question from Tim. Is it possible to add views to a serverless pool as a data store in ML Workspace? The Azure SQL Data Store limits to the *database.windows.net endpoint. Stefan, is that one you can take?
Is a person who asked live? Can we get the clarification, please?
Oh yeah. Feel free to ask Tim a follow-up question. He's
can
live.
you please rephrase the question to help me understand what's the actual question? Because I missed it in original text. Sorry.
Oh, is it possible to add views in a serverless pool as a data store in ML Workspace? The Azure SQL Data Store limits to this *database.windows.net endpoint.
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, the person wants to actually query the views from Serverless SQL Pool, right, from the ML Workspace. And I think that this database Windows endpoint should be also good enough for Serverless SQL Pool, because with the endpoint, you're actually connecting to the Serverless SQL Pool as a whole, right? And then you can specify in your schema and in your query text which exactly view or external table you want to query, right? So I'm not sure, I'm not 100% positive because I haven't tried this myself, and if if I actually got the question right, please correct me if I'm wrong or rephrase the question as Philip mentioned.
Cool. Jean Laurent. Oh, go
The
ahead.
problem is,
Sorry.
If the problem here is that you cannot connect to serverless database using and you need to use this database Windows.net suffix. I think that you can connect to serverless database both using Synapse and database URL suffix. So if this is the problem, if some tool force you just to put the name of Synapse workspace and automatically add this database.windows.net, I believe that you can add a workspace name, and that workspace name.database Windows.net will also work for serverless.
Yeah, that's right.
Let me just jump in. I think that would be workspace / on demand, right?
Yeah, probably yes. You're right.
Yeah, because let me provide a context here. So workspace name is, let's say, Philip workspace, but the connection string to serverless SQL pool in this workspace is Philip workspace / on demand dot database Windows.net and
not slash dash.
Sorry.
That's why we have all of you here.
We'll come to solution together.
Yes, exactly. Jean Laurent asks, is there any performance consideration when creating multiple databases versus a single one with multiple schema or naming when working in the lakehouse paradigm? And I think that's for Philip.
Yeah, so there is no hard limit that we put on the endpoint in this context, except for a number of databases. So if you want to create a multiple databases, just please make sure that you take this limit into consideration. I will share the link to current constraints into a chat. And speaking of performance, there should be no difference between having all the objects within the same database with within different schemas or whatever. What we saw so far is that customers are dividing their workload between different databases if that is a multi-tenant solution. So basically they either decide to have a database per tenant or maybe schema within the database per tenant. But performance-wise, that should make a difference.
Cool. A question for Strahinja. It's really open-ended. What other file types will be supported in the future?
Yeah, so I don't think we can actually disclose this right now, but I would definitely recommend the person who asked this question, as Philip previously mentioned, I believe, to go on AKMS/Synapse ideas, and then submit your suggestion or vote up for some already suggested format.
Cool.
Yeah, the team is actively trashing these ideas, so it should be up to date there.
Cool. This question from Matthias. Are there any plans to allow serverless SQL pools to query dedicated SQL pools directly?
Well, I would say that basically the similar answer as Strahinja provided. That's not something that we can discuss here.
Cool. Tim asks, being able to update, especially merging Delta tables, would be incredibly useful for the analytics ELT use case. Is this something else I should submit to Synapse ideas?
I think that this is good enough, and people will just vote for this.
Cool. Matthias asks, is it possible to automatically update external tables data if new data arrives in the lake without doing new CETAS? This is for Philip, I think.
Well, all the formats are immutable except Delta. So the only way is to use Delta format. That way, Serverless SQL Pool will always be able to read up-to-date content. But still, that means, as Jovan explained, Delta does not support, Serverless SQL Pool does not support DMLs, data manipulation language for Delta. So that means that you still need to use some other tool, maybe Spark, to handle the changes to data for Delta. From there on, Serverless SQL Pool will be able to read it.
Cool. This question back to pricing. So for Strahinja, Stoker asks for an overview of the pricing model difference between dedicated and serverless. When would you prefer dedicated pools versus serverless as far as pricing goes?
Yeah, so Serverless SQL Pool has the true pay-per-use model, as I previously mentioned, so you will get only for amount of data processed. And if you don't use it, you won't pay for it. So while on the other side, dedicated SQL Pool has the predictable cost and performance according to the service level you choose, right? Depending on the data warehouse units. So dedicated SQL Pools is there to reserve processing power for data stored in SQL tables. And it is definitely meant to be used if you have the predictable workload. While on the other hand, Serverless SQL Pool is for unplanned or bursty workloads that are being done on top of the external data, which is available in Azure Data Lake storage account, Cosmos DB storage account, or Dataverse. So for these unpredictable or bursty workloads, we would definitely recommend using a Serverless SQL Pool endpoint.
Cool. We have a new question from Greg Kramer. Hi, Greg. For someone just coming up to speed on what Synapse is all about, can someone give a high level of what the Power BI Synapse story is? Why should Power BI folks learn Synapse? I know that's a little off topic, but I think Power BI is near and dear to all of us as a great output of all the work in Synapse. Anyone want to take that one?
Well, the idea of serverless is that you as Power BI user do not need to learn anything about Synapse or serverless. So when you're working with Power BI, you're creating tables, you're creating views, and you're just discovering these tables and views in your Power BI. So if you have classic SQL skills that you're using on SQL Server, Azure SQL, you can create your own views. So somebody who is data engineer can create views on top of your data, and you as somebody who is creating Power BI reports will just point to this serverless database and pick up all views or tables to be shown on Power BI. So technically, serverless is designed to enable data engineers to create a connection between BI engineers who are using Power BI and just want to see views or tables, but they just want to have this directly on data lake. So with Serverless Pool, you don't need to learn about Azure Data Lake, about different formats like Parquet, Delta, CSV. You can just take your view or table on top of Delta or CSV file, and you will just be able to show this in your Power BI.
Sounds good. Greg, hopefully that helps you out. Feel free to follow up with more questions if you have them. Luca is asking, how do I get the recording? Oh, we will have a recording of this afterwards. We generally release them a couple weeks afterwards, after we process them and get them up on YouTube. So watch for that. Follow Azure Synapse on Twitter and we'll send it out, I'm sure. John Laurent asks, is there a way to save money on serverless consumption with something like a reservation for a dedicated pool? And maybe, Strahinja, you already addressed that.
No, there is no way to do that. The reason is that this is not a reservation-based service. Basically, it's serverless, and resources are not attributed to your endpoint unless you connect and start querying the data. So there is no reservation concept, hence no way to purchase upfront.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole idea of serverless model, right? There is no infrastructure that you need to maintain, and there is no upfront cost. So that's
I would add something there, as you're obviously interested in reducing costs. We shared earlier, I believe, in the comments, cost management article from the documentation. There you can see what data processed that you're charged for each of your query based on data processed, as Drahinja mentioned, explained, and there you can see exactly what is priced into this. What figures is data processed based on. By understanding that, you can come up with ways on how to reduce your costs. And just like a teaser, one obvious thing would be move to Parquet and Delta instead of CSV, because those are compressed formats. Or maybe you can split your complex workloads or queries into multiple smaller ones by pre-aggregating the data with the create external table as select, and then just querying the already aggregated data. But it really depends on your workload. So yeah, you can check those two, cost management and best practices, and you can follow up with us if needed, if there are questions related to those articles.
Cool. Jean-Laurent also asks, is there a performance impact when defining schema instead of selecting on our external view when querying from Parquet files, as Parquet has a schema internally?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So that's a very good question. So Parquet is self-described, like there is column metadata, except that for character columns, there is no metadata about the maximum column length. So like in a SQL Server, when you create a table and define a column, you have to specify some length, right? It would be 5 characters, 10 characters, or maybe a max or some lobs. For Parquet, there is no notion of column size. Basically, it's just a character column and that's it. The thing is, if you do not specify schema for these columns, they will be recognized, inferred by Serverless SQL Pool as varchar 8000, which obviously is not the best way to work with a SQL. As you know, all SQLs have challenges with lobs, large objects, but also with the large character columns. So the suggestion is to always specify the schema once you want to move to production in order to get the best performance. But there is improvement that landed to production in June, I believe, where if your character columns has more than 100 characters, then the engine will calculate the average column length by sampling the data. So something similar like statistics. So if you have a query that is targeting columns that are longer than 100 characters, system will, before running your query, run something like select average of length of particular column, which is longer than 100. That way, the engine will have a better understanding of your data and will be able to do the better resource estimation and hence produce the better execution plans. So that's what the Serverless SQL Pool will do for you. But obviously, that there is a threshold. It triggers only after 100 bytes. So if you want to squeeze the most performance out of Serverless SQL Pool and you're using Parquet or Delta, please specify the length of a character columns.
Sounds good. Nanthak Umarich, sorry if I'm butchering your name, asked about predict function in Serverless SQL Pool. There is a bit of an echo. Sorry. Okay. And I think this one might be for you, Strahinja. PySpark predict function versus dedicated SQL Pool predict. Which one is better and more efficient?
Yeah, so we can't really comment about PySpark predict function and dedicated SQL pool predict function, since this is actually a bit out of area of our expertise. We are mostly dedicated to serverless SQL pool, but this scenario could actually be interesting to us for serverless SQL pool side as well, and we would love to understand better what are you trying to achieve in your scenario, and what is your need. So if the person is if the person who asked this question is right now on the chat, on the call, please reach out to us offline via email or Teams or whatever. I think, Tyler, do we have this option, like via email or something like that, so we can actually sync with that person offline?
Yeah, feel free to email synapseinfluencers@microsoft.com, and we will make the connection there. Cool. Another question that came in is about time travel with Delta and serverless. And is there a way to speed up the queries and how to do that? I think this is for Jovan.
Yeah, I think that I already talked about time travel. Currently, we don't have it. Once we complete all these performance improvements that we are doing on Delta, time travel will be probably first feature that we will focus or put in our plans, but currently we cannot say when it will happen. Now, I didn't understand this question about performance improvements. So we will have some performance improvements without any changes in your code. But for all other performance improvements, please follow the best practices, like using partitioning, using Z-order, using small possible data types. So these are the only recommendations that we can share with you.
Is there something in docs or a blog post that we can share about performance improvements?
We have best
Valentin,
practices page.
Okay, cool. We'll put that in the chat.
Tyler,
for folks.
I would like to suggest something as well. So you asked about improvements. So the best practices are in the doc. I think we shared it, but we can share it again if needed. But the improvements, what improvements are landing into production, please follow Synapse monthly blog. Each month there is a blog post which describes what are the new things in Synapse overall, and there is always a section for a SQL, of course.
For sure, and we even have a video that goes out with it, so watch for that. Usama asks for more details about the optimization of queries in Serverless Pool and Spark versus Serverless SQL Pool use cases. I'm not sure if I got that exactly.
I think I got it, so I will try to answer, and I mean, always you can speak up if not. So I will address the second part first. So what would be the use cases between the Serverless SQL Pool and the Spark? It's a bit tricky for us to answer that because we are Serverless SQL Pool experts, but I would just provide a brief overview, brief difference. Spark is used for heavy data manipulation and probably machine learning, while Serverless SQL Pool, although it can do data transformation, is primarily focused on a read path, meaning to be a serving layer using a SQL. So obviously they have differences in features. Also, they have different models. Like Spark is you pay for basically use resources. In a Serverless SQL Pool, you pay just for the data that your queries processed. Speaking of performance, Jovan mentioned a few things that you can do, but I will quickly walk you through the high-level items. So in a best practices article, you can find all of them, but now I will just focus on the major ones. So as in any service in a cloud, you definitely need to make sure that there are that the client and the endpoint and the storage are in the same region, right? Because you want to minimize the network latency. Then there is a section in best practices which describes storage layout. So for each table, how your folders and files should be laid out for best performance. Then you can find also data types that you should use. We discussed it a bit earlier. So sometimes you need to specify data types to squeeze the the most performance out of Serverless SQL Pool. Speaking in general, right? For CSV, you have to write data types, and for Parquet, you need to write it only if you need to squeeze additional performance, because Parquet is self-describing, so we already know the data types. Then there is a section that is devoted to optimizing filters. So how to make sure that for instance, row group elimination is there. Then please use partitioning, because when you use partitioning, you split your data into different folders based on some column, let's say a year. And if you're interested in a single year only, we will read just a single folder, right? Not the whole table, just to get out the rows for a year that you're interested in. And there are a few more tricks there, I would say, in the best practices. Well, I realize it does sound probably like a lot of best practices. Actually, there are not a lot of them. They're quite easy to follow, mostly quite easy to follow. And we are continuously improving the service in order to eliminate best practices one by one. So stay tuned, please check best practices, and please follow us on the Synapse blog as well. So you can follow up with the improvements that we do.
Cool. Thanks, Philip. There's a question, anonymous question came in. What is the biggest difference between a lake database and a serverless SQL database? Both can be queried with serverless SQL, but it seems like lake database is more Spark oriented. I think that's for you, Jovan.
Yeah. So the key difference is how you want to build your lakehouse. If you have Spark engineers who are building a lakehouse using Spark notebooks, defining tables using Spark, managing tables using Spark, updating tables using Spark, then you use lake databases, because lake databases are managed by Spark and analyzed by SQL. If you have SQL developers who don't have strong Spark skills and they want to directly query external tables and views using T-SQL, then you are using SQL databases. So in both cases, you are querying data using Serverless Pool to expose this data to Power BI and analytical tools. And the only difference is that if you want to update data and manage metadata and objects using Spark, you're using lake databases. If you want to do this using T-SQL, you're using SQL databases. And that's the main difference.
Cool, thank you. And Jean-Laurent asks, is it a valid use case to use serverless with external tables for traditional data warehouse that will only be queried by reporting tools like Power BI if we are fluent in Spark and creating Parquet files?
Well, this looks like classic lake house scenario, so it is valid. So lakehouse is very similar to data warehouse, and the only difference is that data is not in the data warehouse, it is in the lake. So if you have Spark skills, you want to update your data using Spark notebooks, and you want to keep it in open format, but still keeping this T-SQL surface area for analytics, then that's the core scenario for you. In most of the cases, customers are choosing between lake databases or lake houses and data warehouses based on the skills of data engineers. If you have data engineers with Spark skills, you're using lakehouse. If you have data engineers with T-SQL skills, you're using data warehouse. In both cases, you have analytics using T-SQL.
Thank you, Jovan. We have a question coming from the Synapse Tech Community Forums. I thought would be good to ask to this group. Have a defined view in Azure Synapse Serverless Pool that fetches data with open row set from Cosmos DB. I also have data in a table in a dedicated SQL pool. Is there a way I can do a SQL query that would join these two objects? I want to know if Stefan wants to answer this.
Well, I will try to answer this. Unfortunately, this is not possible because you cannot create a query that joins that data warehouse table with a serverless table or view. So they are separate engines. The only way that you can do is you can query your data from Cosmos DB and use create external table as select to export data on data lake as probably as Parquet file. And then in a dedicated pool, you can create external table on that output, Parquet output, and then join it with dedicated pool. So this is like doing something small ETL from Cosmos DB analytical store to like classic Azure Data Lake storage. And that's one solution. Another solution might be to avoid joins and try to use Power BI or client tools where you just create two connections, one on dedicated pool, another on view on serverless pool. Use some import mode just to pull all data on client side, and then create reports that are joining data there. Or third solution might be to use something like SQL Server Link Service or Azure SQL Managed Instance Link Service that can connect both to serverless pool and dedicated pool, and then run a query from managed instance or SQL Server using four-part names that will take data and join data in SQL Server or managed instance. So these are some options for cross-joining data, but currently you cannot query dedicated tables from serverless, and you cannot query serverless views from dedicated.
Thanks, Jovan. We have a few minutes left, so get your questions in now if you're, and we can ask the team before the top of the hour here. It was just a general question about access control in replicated databases. Anybody want to address that?
Well, I will give you a generic answer. So security is defined on data lake. So you're using data lake RBAC roles or ACLs or whatever security on data lake, and this is like storage level of security that secures your data. And then you are creating external tables on these folders or files. You have second layer of security in serverless pool, where you can say that you can give a user Synapse admin permission that will be able to read data from all tables in all databases. But that user will also be able to create new SQL databases. So sometimes it might be too much permission for that kind of user. Another solution might be to give a user a reader permission on server. There are two permissions: grant select all user securables and grant connect to any database. So if you give to a login these two permissions, that login will be able to connect to any lake database and read any table in any lake database, but will not be able to create new databases. And third option is to pick one lake database, create user like Azure AD user in that lake database, and then grant DB reader role to assign the DB reader role to that user. In that case, that user will be scoped to this lake database and will be able to read data from any table in that lake database. In lake database, you can create views, procedures, and functions on top of your external tables that are replicated from Spark, but you don't have this finer granularity, like you cannot grant select on some view or grant select on some table. So the only granularity that you have is like server level read and write, like server level read and manage. Sorry, that was better description. Server level read only and database level read only user.
Cool. Thank you. And this last question, Tim gets our last question here, is for Stefan. Are there performance impacts when joining to external tables located in two different storage accounts compared to being located in the same storage account?
You're muted.
Depends on the case where the storage accounts are located. In which region are they? So if they're in the same region, the performance impact will be like not significant, so it will be very small. But if they're in two different regions, then that will be a cross-region query, and then that will add some overhead to the query. That's it.
There is also a problem with even if you have one account in same region, you might hit some limits on that data lake account. So every data lake account has some limits in terms of throughput, number of IO requests. So in some cases, if you see on your storage that you're hitting this limit, you might add multiple data lake accounts and try to leverage bandwidth from multiple accounts. But you will need to do a lot of troubleshooting to determine that this is actually the problem.
Cool. And that brings us to the top of the hour. I want to thank Jovan and Philip and Strahinja and Stefan for today's discussion, and to everyone who participated in the session. We had lots of great questions today. And don't forget to catch Jovan and Philip in their Synapse Espresso video series. I think someone's putting a link into the chat to share with you all if you don't have that. Hope you all learned something new that you can use in your data and analytics work. We are dropping a short survey into the chat window, so please take a minute to let us know what you thought of today's Q&A, and if you have any topics you'd like us to cover in future sessions. Registration for our next event is opening shortly. I think it might even be open now. So please visit the website soon, aka.ms/synapseinfluencers. And keep an eye on our Twitter post for an announcement when that goes live. On September 28th, we are going to be joined by Sunil Sabat and members of his team who will be answering your questions on data integration security in Azure Synapse. I know data integration was our most popular session way back when we started these ATEs, so excited to bring Sunil back to answer your questions. If you haven't already done so, please be sure to follow us on Twitter at Azure_Synapse and tag Synapse related posts with the hashtag Synapse Influencers and Azure Synapse so that other community members can easily find your content. Don't forget, if you haven't yet asked for swag, we have lots to give away. So either ping us in the chat with your handle or email synapseinfluencers@microsoft.com. Again, thanks everyone, and hope to see you again on September 28th. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.